The new arrival. Mason Bradley had learned to recognize fear in 17 different species since arriving at the Galactic Confederation's maximum security prison. Some showed it through subtle biochemical changes, others through distinct behavioral patterns. The Nexian armor plates would rattle at a frequency just below human hearing, the Movian tentacles displayed stress patterns in their metaphors, and the silicon-based plantoids actually altered their molecular structure, though they insisted it was just optimal photosynthesis alignment. Even the guards, with all their professional training, couldn't quite hide the way they checked their weapons whenever he walked past. It was almost funny, really. Here he was, surrounded by beings that could shoot plasma from specialized glands, extrude diamond-hard crystalline spikes, or literally alter the quantum state of matter with their minds, and they were afraid of him. All because humans had evolved on a little blue death trap of a planet where the air itself could rust metal, the rain was occasionally acidic, and everything, absolutely everything, was trying to kill everything else. The facility hung in geosynchronous orbit above Nox Prime, its structures stretching out like frozen fractals against the star-studded backdrop of space. From the outside, it probably looked beautiful. From the inside, well. Mason had other words for it. His new cellmate, a Garcidian named Clica, chittered nervously from their separate sleeping pod. The insectoid alien had arrived yesterday, mandibles clicking in what Mason recognized as their species' version of hyperventilation. He didn't blame them, prison was prison, no matter what planet you were from. But Mason's mind wasn't on his cellmate. Instead, he focused on the distinct pattern of the force field protecting their cell, counting the milliseconds between energy pulses. After 3 weeks in detention block 2, he'd gotten pretty good at it. Not that anyone would notice, to them, it just looked like another human quirk, the way he'd tap his fingers against his knee in what appeared to be a nervous habit. Commander K. Park's message, delivered through carefully encrypted channels under the guise of legal correspondence, kept playing through his mind, watch your back. Some predators prefer to hunt in packs. The warning wasn't necessary, he'd already noticed how the prison's dynamics had shifted since Ragnaro's arrival. Species that normally avoided each other were having quiet conversations in corners. The Nexian hive mind representatives had started moving in synchronized patterns. Even the silicon-based plantoids were aligning their structures in ways that suggested communication rather than optimal photosynthesis. Their forming alliances, Clica had observed nervously one morning, their antennae twitching in agitation. Amazing what a common enemy can do for interspecies cooperation, Mason had replied, stretching his muscles in ways that made nearby aliens flinch. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Mason wasn't just some random human who'd gotten caught up in the wrong side of the law. His crime had been carefully orchestrated, a complex dance of seemingly random events that had led him precisely where he needed to be. The stolen ships, the compromised security facility, the endangered lives, all of it had been meticulously planned, though not for the reasons listed in his official file. The Galactic Confederation was facing a threat they couldn't even begin to comprehend, and sometimes the only way to fight a shadow was to step into the darkness yourself. That's why he was here, in the most secure prison facility in known space, surrounded by the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Mason's thoughts were interrupted by the distinctive sound of magnetic boots in the corridor, not the usual guard patrol pattern. He sat up, his casual posture shifting subtly to something more alert. The footsteps belonged to Warden Val, whose massive form soon blocked out the corridor lights, his exoskeleton refracting them into rainbow patterns across the floor. The infamous Deathworlder seems quiet today, Val's translator rendered his clicking speech into standard Galactic. Nothing to say. That's probably wise. Wouldn't want to upset anyone with your presence. Mason remained silent, knowing it would drive the crony crazy. He'd learned early on that they viewed silence as a sign of submission, but in this case, Mason was simply conserving energy. Every interaction was a data point, every conversation a potential piece of intelligence. The warden's visit wasn't random, nothing in this prison was. The timing, just after Mason had received his encrypted message, suggested that either their security protocols had been compromised, or someone was getting nervous about having a human in their midst during whatever was being planned. As Val departed, Mason returned to his calculations. The force field's energy pulses weren't random either, they followed a complex but predictable pattern, one that would become crucial in the days ahead. He'd noted similar patterns throughout the facility, the guard rotations, the maintenance schedules, even the seemingly random visits from various officials. Everything was connected, forming a complex web of timing and opportunity. Mason just had to wait for the right moment to pull the threads and watch it all unravel. The question wasn't if the other inmates would make their move, it was when, and whether they'd realize too late that they weren't the predators in this particular hunt. The lights dimmed to their night cycle, casting the cell block in a soft blue glow that most species found soothing. Mason lay back on his reinforced bed, rated to handle the higher muscle density of a Deathworlder, and closed his eyes. But he didn't sleep. Instead, he listened to the hum of the force field, counting pulses, making calculations, and waiting for the piece to fall into place. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of week 4, and if his intelligence was correct, that's when things would start getting interesting. The various species might think they had the advantage of numbers and coordination, but they were about to learn a valuable lesson about evolution. Sometimes the biggest fish in the pond doesn't know how to handle meeting something from a different pond entirely. And humans? They came from the deadliest pond of all. Shifting tides. The engineering deck of the prison facility hummed with a symphony of machinery that most species found unsettling. For Mason Bradley, it sounded like home. He'd volunteered for maintenance duty his second week in, citing his experience with similar systems during his time in the Terran Marines. What he hadn't mentioned was that those similar systems had been on classified stealth vessels designed for deep cover operations. "Hand me the plasma cutter," Mason called to his work partner, a Nexian drone named 683. The crystalline being's faceted surface reflected the harsh industrial lighting as it passed the tool with one of its manipulator arms. "Observation, your repair methodology is unconventional," 683 noted, its translator rendering the thought patterns into standard Galactic. Query, "Are you certain about bypassing the primary coolant loop?" Mason smiled as he made the precise cut he'd been planning for days. "Sometimes you have to think outside the box. Besides, the secondary system can handle the load just fine." What 683 didn't know was that Mason wasn't just fixing the environmental controls, he was creating a backdoor. Every repair he made was part of a larger pattern, subtle changes that would only become apparent when everything was set in motion. The real question was whether he'd have enough time to finish his preparations. The prison's population dynamics had shifted dramatically over the past week. Species that had been at war for generations were suddenly finding common ground, united by their shared fear of the human in their midst. Mason wiped his hands on his prison coveralls and headed back to his cell, noting how the other inmates gave him a wide berth while trying to appear casual about it. The silicon-based plantoids had aligned their crystalline structures in a way that suggested they were transmitting data. The Movian's tentacles showed stress patterns that indicated intensive planning rather than their usual anxiety. "Interesting morning?" Klika asked when Mason returned to their cell. The Garcidian had proven to be an unexpectedly valuable source of information, their species' natural ability to detect pheromone changes making them aware of subtle shifts in the prison's atmosphere. "Never a dull moment in paradise," Mason replied, settling onto his reinforced bunk. "Though I did notice our friend Ragnaro had some visitors during maintenance hours. Quite the social butterfly for someone who supposedly prefers solitary hunting." Klika's antennae twitched nervously. The Dargan met with representatives from 3 different power blocks. The Nexian Collective, the Movian Consortium, and, they hesitated, mandibles clicking rapidly. "And the warden himself," Mason finished. "I know. Hard to miss a crony's bioluminescent patterns, even through tinted viewport glass." He stretched, joints popping in ways that made nearby aliens flinch. "Any word on what they discussed?" "Nothing concrete, but Clicka's voice dropped to a whisper. There are rumors about a shipment arriving tomorrow. Something that required special containment protocols. Mason kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. The timing aligned perfectly with the intelligence Commander Park had shared in her encrypted message. The pieces were falling into place, but not necessarily in a way that made him comfortable. A sharp rap on their cell's force field interrupted his thoughts. Warden Val stood there, his exoskeleton displaying patterns that Mason had learned to recognize as barely contained aggression. Bradley, the warden's translator, crackled. Your presence is requested in medical. Routine examination. Mason raised an eyebrow. Funny, I don't remember scheduling any checkups. New protocol for Deathworlders, Val replied, his secondary arms twitching slightly. We wouldn't want to neglect your unique physiological needs. The lie was obvious, there had been no new protocols implemented since Mason's arrival. This was something else, likely connected to tomorrow's mysterious shipment. The question was whether to play along or force their hand early. Well, far be it from me to ignore medical advice, Mason said, standing slowly. Lead the way. The walk to medical took them through 3 security checkpoints, each one requiring more elaborate scanning procedures than strictly necessary. Mason noted the positions of every guard, every camera, every potential choke point. More importantly, he noted what wasn't there. The usual maintenance drones were conspicuously absent from their programmed routes. The medical bay itself was eerily quiet, its usual complement of staff reduced to a single Movian doctor whose tentacles displayed clear stress patterns. The examination room they led him to was reinforced, designed to contain beings far stronger than the average human. Just a few standard tests, the doctor said, their tentacles weaving complex patterns that contradicted their casual tone. Please remain still while we calibrate the equipment. Mason complied, watching through half-lidded eyes as they activated various scanning devices. He recognized most of them, standard medical equipment mixed with some definitely non-standard security scanners. They were looking for something specific. Fascinating readings, the doctor murmured, their tentacles now showing patterns associated with intense concentration. Your cellular structure, it's unlike any human we've examined before. I eat my vegetables, Mason replied dryly. Does wonders for the constitution. The doctor's tentacles froze momentarily, a clear sign of agitation. These patterns, they're similar to what you'd expect to find in someone exposed to quantum oscillation. Mason finished, dropping all pretense of casualness. You know, it's interesting how many people seem concerned about that particular incident lately. The doctor's color shifted rapidly, their tentacles displaying clear alarm patterns now. Warden Valve stepped forward, his exoskeleton blazing with aggressive bioluminescence. What exactly were you doing with that oscillator, Bradley? Val demanded. The official report claims it was a simple theft, but we both know there's more to it. Mason smiled, the same smile that had made hardened Marines take an instinctive step back. Would you believe I was just borrowing it for a science project? Before Val could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the room in a harsh red glow as automated announcements echoed through the corridors in 17 different languages. Containment breach in Sector 7, the system announced. All personnel initiate lockdown procedures. Sector 7, exactly where Mason had been repairing the environmental controls earlier that day. The warden's exoskeleton flashed with patterns of rage and fear as he realized the implications. What did you do? He demanded, but Mason was already moving. In the confined space of the medical bay, most species would be at a disadvantage. But humans had evolved to fight in tight spaces, to use their environment as a weapon. Mason's supposedly routine maintenance work had given him intimate knowledge of every system, every potential failure point. As chaos erupted around him, Mason allowed himself a small smile. The real game was about to begin, and his opponents were about to learn why humans had a reputation for turning the tables on their hunters. They thought they were setting a trap for him. They didn't realize they'd walked right into his containment. Red emergency lights painted the medical bay in crimson shadows as Mason Bradley made his move. The Movian doctor's tentacles whipped toward him, displaying attack patterns, but Mason had spent weeks studying their species' reaction times. He was already moving before the appendages could make contact, rolling under a medical scanner and coming up behind the startled alien. "Don't," Mason warned as Warden Val reached for his neural disruptor. "You really don't want to escalate this situation." The warden's exoskeleton flashed patterns of rage and confusion. "You have nowhere to go, Deathworlder. This facility is designed to contain beings far more dangerous than you." "Is it?" Mason asked, keeping his tone conversational as he accessed a wall terminal. "Because from where I'm standing, you've got bigger problems than one human." He typed in a series of commands he'd memorized during his maintenance work. The facility's environmental systems responded immediately. Throughout Sector 7, carefully modified coolant systems began venting precisely calculated amounts of vapor into the air. Not enough to be immediately dangerous, but sufficient to make most species extremely uncomfortable. "What did you do?" Val demanded, his translator barely keeping up with his agitated clicks. "Created a distraction," Mason replied. "Though I suspect our new arrival in Sector 7 is about to create an even bigger one." As if on cue, a deep rumble shook the facility. The mysterious shipment that had arrived earlier, the one requiring special containment protocols, was making its presence known. "Impossible," the Movian doctor whispered, their tentacles showing patterns of absolute terror. "The quantum containment fields are operating at exactly 73% efficiency," Mason finished. "Just enough to look normal on standard diagnostics, but not quite enough to maintain full containment when subjected to specific resonance frequencies. Amazing what you can accomplish with a plasma cutter and intimate knowledge of coolant systems." Another tremor rocked the facility, stronger this time. Mason used the moment of distraction to access the medical bay's secure storage unit, retrieving something small and metallic that he quickly pocketed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Val said, his patterns shifting to show genuine fear. "The specimen in Sector 7 is a quantum-shifted bioweapon," Mason cut him off. "Developed using technology reverse-engineered from the oscillator I supposedly stole." "Yeah, I know all about Project Echo." He smiled grimly. "Did you really think the Terran Marines wouldn't notice someone weaponizing quantum physics?" The revelation hit Val like a physical blow, his exoskeleton cycling through patterns of shock and dismay. "How could you possibly know about a top-secret project being developed by a coalition of supposedly unconnected species?" Mason shrugged. "Let's just say I had some help from the inside." Speaking of which, the facility's communication system crackled to life, but instead of the expected emergency announcements, a familiar voice filled the air. "Attention all personnel," Commander K. Park's voice rang through the speakers, "this is a Priority 1 alert. Implementation of Protocol Dark Star is now in effect. This is not a drill." The effect was immediate. Every guard's neural disruptor powered down automatically, safety protocols engaging as the weapons recognized a command override they were never supposed to receive. "What's happening?" the Movian doctor demanded, their tentacles writhing in agitation. "What's happening," Mason explained calmly, "is that while everyone was so focused on containing the scary Deathworlder, they missed the real threat growing right under their noses. The quantum oscillator incident. It wasn't a theft, it was a tracking operation. We needed to know who was interested in the technology, who would try to acquire it. And you all played your parts perfectly." More alarms joined the cacophony as systems throughout the facility began responding to Park's override codes. Force fields flickered, security doors sealed, and atmospheric processors switched to emergency protocols that Mason had carefully modified over weeks of maintenance work. "The bioweapon," Val said, realization dawning in his patterns. "You knew it was coming here. We knew someone was trying to develop quantum-shifted organisms, Mason corrected. Beings capable of existing in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Perfect for infiltration, assassination, or triggering cascading quantum events that could destabilize entire star systems. We just needed to find out who was behind it and where they were keeping their prototype. Another tremor shook the facility, accompanied by the sound of tearing metal from somewhere deep within Sector 7. The bioweapon was fully awake now, its quantum-shifted nature allowing it to exist partially out of phase with normal matter. "You have to help us contain it," the doctor pleaded, their tentacles showing patterns of desperation. "That's the plan," Mason agreed. "But first, we need to have a chat about your research contacts in the Outer Rim. Because that thing didn't develop itself, and I'm very interested in meeting the beings who thought quantum-shifting living organisms was a good idea." Before anyone could respond, the facility's power grid fluctuated wildly. Emergency systems kicked in, but they too had been subtly modified during Mason's maintenance sessions. Throughout the prison, carefully orchestrated chaos was unfolding. "I suggest you both get to the secure command center," Mason said, moving toward the door. "Things are about to get interesting." "Where are you going?" Val demanded. Mason checked the small device he'd retrieved from medical storage, a quantum phase detector disguised as standard medical equipment. "I'm going to have a conversation with your prototype." Unlike most beings in this facility, humans have some experience dealing with things that exist in multiple states of reality simultaneously. We call it quantum tunneling, and it's amazing what you can learn about it when your species develops on a planet where even the laws of physics occasionally try to kill you. As he stepped into the corridor, Mason activated his neural implant secure channel. "Commander Park, the package is awake and the stage is set. Time to show these beings why they should have paid more attention to Earth's physics journals instead of just our biology reports." The response came immediately, "Understood, Sergeant. Try not to break the space-time continuum this time." Mason grinned as he moved through the chaos-filled corridors, heading toward the sounds of quantum-shifted destruction. "No promises, Commander. No promises at all." Behind him, Warden Val and the Movian doctor stared in growing horror as they realized just how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered. They'd thought they were containing a dangerous Deathworlder. Instead, they'd given him exactly what he needed to expose their entire operation. The game wasn't just changing, it was entering a whole new quantum state of play. Quantum shadows. Sector 7 looked like something out of a nightmare, if nightmares could exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. The corridors wavered between solid matter and possibility, reality fraying at the edges where the bioweapon had passed. Mason's quantum phase detector hummed continuously, its display showing overlapping probability waves that would have given most physicists a headache. "Fascinating," Mason muttered, studying the readings. They actually managed to stabilize the quantum field enough to maintain coherent consciousness across multiple states. His neural implant crackled with Commander Park's voice, less admiring, more containing, "Sergeant. That thing is broadcasting quantum signatures that are lighting up sensors across 3 systems." "Just appreciating the engineering, Commander," Mason replied, moving carefully through the devastation. "Always good to understand what you're up against. Speaking of which, Clicka, you reading these patterns?" The Garcidian's voice came through clear on the secure channel, their natural ability to interpret complex sensory data proving invaluable. "The quantum fluctuations are following a distinct pattern. It's not random destruction, it's searching for something." Mason nodded, though none of his allies could see it. His cellmates' involvement had been carefully planned from the start, their species' unique sensory capabilities making them perfect for monitoring quantum state changes. "Any idea what it's looking for?" "Based on the search pattern." Clicka's mandibles clicked thoughtfully over the comm, "It appears to be drawn to areas with high energy concentrations. The primary reactor, the quantum containment systems. The prison's power grid," Mason finished. "It's not just a weapon, it's trying to trigger a cascading quantum event." He quickened his pace, following the trail of reality distortions. Commander, are the countermeasures in place? Affirmative. Dr. Chen's quantum stabilization fields are ready for deployment. But Sergeant. Park hesitated. The calculations suggest a 60% chance of complete quantum decoherence if we don't get this exactly right. Mason grinned as he rounded a corner, finally catching sight of his quarry. Good thing humans are so adaptable then. The bioweapon defied easy description, existing as it did in multiple states of reality simultaneously. In one quantum state, it appeared as a crystalline entity of impossible geometry. In another, it was something like living darkness given form. And in yet another, it seemed to be pure energy, crackling with potential. Well, Mason said, activating the quantum stabilization device he'd retrieved from medical storage, you're certainly impressive. But you know what's really impressive? A species that evolved on a planet where quantum tunneling happens naturally in their cellular structure. The entity's attention shifted to him, its various quantum states rippling with what might have been curiosity. Or hunger. Hard to tell with cross-dimensional entities. That's right, Mason continued, carefully manipulating the device's controls. Earth's background radiation, combined with our planet's magnetic field fluctuations, created some interesting evolutionary adaptations. Including the ability to perceive and interact with quantum-shifted matter. The bioweapon moved closer, its multiple states creating a visual effect like watching reality fold in on itself. Mason's neural implant transmitted everything he was seeing back to Commander Park's team, while Klika's sensory data provided crucial information about the entity's quantum state fluctuations. The thing about quantum physics, Mason said conversationally as he worked, is that observation affects reality. And humans? We're really good at observing things. Had to be, living on a death world where anything could kill you at any moment. The creature struck, its attack existing in multiple probability states simultaneously. But Mason had been counting on that. The quantum stabilization device activated, creating a field that forced the entity to exist in a single quantum state, precisely the one Mason had calculated would be most vulnerable. Now, Commander. Mason shouted into his neural link. Throughout the facility, carefully hidden quantum resonators activated, their frequencies matched precisely to the bioweapon's forced quantum state. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The entity's multiple states tried to collapse back into quantum uncertainty, but the resonators kept it locked in a single reality. Fascinating defense mechanism, Mason noted as the creature writhed in quantum distress. Try to shift between states fast enough and you can exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. But force you into a single quantum state. The bioweapon's form began to stabilize, its impossible geometry resolving into something more comprehensible. But Mason's victory was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout the facility as new problems arose. Sergeant, Park's voice was tense. We've got multiple quantum signatures appearing throughout the facility. It appears our friend here was acting as a quantum beacon. Mason checked his quantum phase detector, watching as new probability waves began appearing throughout the prison. They're using the quantum containment breach to mask a targeted invasion. Clever. He adjusted the stabilization device's settings. Klika, you getting this? Multiple quantum shifts detected in all major sectors, the Garcidian confirmed. Pattern suggests coordinated military action. They're using the bioweapon's quantum signature to mask their own quantum-shifted troops. Of course they are, Mason sighed. Because why build one quantum-shifted weapon when you can build an army? He activated his neural implant's broader broadcast capability. Attention all Terran Special Operations personnel, Operation Dark Star is now entering Phase 2. Implement quantum containment protocols and prepare for multidimensional combat. Throughout the facility, hidden operators revealed themselves, deploying technology that had been carefully disguised as standard prison equipment. The conspirators had thought they were the only ones experimenting with quantum-shifted weapons. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Commander, Mason called as he moved to intercept the first wave of quantum-shifted invaders. Remember that quantum oscillator incident everyone was so interested in? The one that officially never happened. Park's voice held a note of amusement despite the situation. Yeah, that one. Mason activated the full capabilities of his neural implant, feeling the quantum stabilization protocols engaged throughout his nervous system. Turns out it wasn't just tracking their research. We were testing our countermeasures. The first quantum-shifted soldier appeared before him, its form flickering between states of reality. Mason smiled, feeling the familiar sensation of his own cells beginning to quantum tunnel, a uniquely human adaptation that had made his species the perfect choice for this mission. Welcome to the real quantum age, he told the startled soldier. Let's see how your training holds up against someone who evolved to handle quantum uncertainty as a survival trait. The battle for the prison, and perhaps the future of quantum warfare itself, was about to begin. And Mason Bradley, the Deathworlder who had seemingly been imprisoned by chance, was ready to show the galaxy why humans had survived their deadly homeworld for so long. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't the one that exists in multiple quantum states, it's the one that evolved to handle quantum uncertainty as just another Tuesday on Earth. Evolution's edge. Reality itself seemed to shudder as quantum-shifted soldiers materialized throughout the prison facility. Their forms flickered between states of existence, making them nearly impossible for most species to track or engage. Nearly impossible, but not quite, not for a species that had evolved on a planet where quantum uncertainty was just another environmental hazard to overcome. Mason Bradley moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, his neural implant working in concert with his naturally quantum-adapted cellular structure. Where others saw confusion and impossibility, he saw patterns, the same kind of patterns that had helped his ancestors predict where predators might emerge from the quantum-active zones of ancient Earth. Multiple hostiles converging on the primary reactor, Clicker reported through the secure channel, their sensory abilities providing crucial tactical data. They're attempting to trigger a quantum cascade failure. Not on my watch, Mason replied, dispatching another quantum-shifted soldier with a precisely calculated strike that forced their quantum state to collapse. Commander Park, status on the facility's quantum dampening field. Ready for activation, Park responded. But Mason, the calculations show a 92% chance of permanent quantum entanglement with the local spacetime fabric. Once we flip that switch, there's no going back. Mason ducked under an attack that existed in 3 quantum states simultaneously, countering with a move that took advantage of his own body's quantum tunneling capabilities. Pretty sure we passed the point of no return when they decided to build quantum-shifted superweapons, Commander. The prison's corridors had become a battlefield unlike any in galactic history. Quantum-shifted soldiers phased through walls and security barriers, while Terran Special Operations personnel engaged them using technology and techniques that had been decades in development. The other inmates watched in stunned silence as their conspiracy unraveled in ways none of them had anticipated. Fascinating adaptation, a voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere at once. Mason turned to find Ragnaro emerging from a quantum shift, the Star Killer's form now enhanced by the same technology as the invading forces. Your species' natural quantum resistance, it's why they wanted you here. They needed to study you. Study us? Mason laughed, the sound carrying clearly despite the chaos around them. They needed to understand why their initial quantum weapon tests kept failing against human targets. But here's the thing about evolution, it doesn't just solve problems. It anticipates them. Ragnaro's quantum-shifted form rippled with deadly intent. You cannot hope to match our technological superiority. We have mastered quantum manipulation at a level your species can barely comprehend. That's where you're wrong, Mason replied, activating the full capabilities of his neural implant. We didn't need to master quantum manipulation. We just needed to survive it. And surviving impossible things? That's what humans do best. The battle that followed defied conventional physics. Ragnarok's technologically enhanced quantum shifting clashed with Mason's evolutionarily developed quantum adaptation. Where the Star Killer relied on programmed algorithms to predict quantum states, Mason's cells naturally resonated with the quantum fabric of reality itself. "Commander," Mason called out as he fought, "now would be a good time for Phase 3. Throughout the facility, hidden quantum resonators began activating in a precise sequence. The pattern wasn't random, it exactly matched the natural quantum fluctuations found in certain regions of Earth's crust. What are you doing?" Ragnarok demanded, his quantum shifts becoming increasingly unstable. "Creating a little piece of home," Mason explained, watching as the quantum-shifted soldiers began struggling to maintain their altered states. "See, Earth's natural quantum fields aren't just random background noise. They're part of a complex system that our species evolved alongside. And when you replicate those exact conditions, the effect was dramatic. The invading forces found their quantum technology fighting against itself, trying to adapt to conditions it was never designed to handle. Their carefully programmed quantum states began collapsing into singular reality, forced there by environmental conditions that human cells had adapted to handle millions of years ago. Quantum dampening field at full power, Park announced. All hostile quantum signatures are being forced into standard spacetime alignment." Mason nodded, watching as Ragnarok's enhanced form flickered and stabilized. "You know what the funny thing about evolution is?" he asked the Star Killer. "It doesn't care about technological superiority. It only cares about survival. And sometimes, the best way to survive isn't to master your environment, it's to learn to dance with its chaos." The facility's quantum sensor arrays lit up one final time as Commander Park's team executed the last phase of Operation Dark Star. The quantum resonance patterns they'd been building throughout the prison reached critical synchronization, creating a cascade effect that permanently altered the local spacetime fabric. "What have you done?" Ragnarok demanded, now fully locked into normal spacetime. "Created a quantum dead zone," Mason explained. "No more shifting between states, no more quantum weapons. Just good old-fashioned regular spacetime physics." He smiled. "Welcome to how most of Earth feels all the time." As security teams moved in to secure the now normalized hostile forces, Mason's neural implant received one final transmission from Commander Park: "Operation Dark Star complete. The quantum weapon program has been exposed, and the Galactic Confederation Security Council is moving to classify quantum shifting technology as a prohibited weapon of mass destruction." "Copy that, Commander," Mason replied, watching as Warden Val and his conspirators were led away in custody. "Think they learned their lesson about underestimating Deathworlders?" Doubtful, Park's tone was amused. "They're still trying to figure out how we managed to turn their own quantum technology against them." Mason glanced at Klicka, who had emerged from their hiding spot to survey the aftermath. "Should we tell them it wasn't really about the technology at all? That we just needed to remind physics to act the way it does back home?" "Let them wonder," Park replied. "Sometimes the best defense is letting people think you're more dangerous than you actually are." "Who says we're not?" Mason grinned, feeling his cells naturally resonating with the quantum-stabilized environment. "After all, we're the species that evolved to treat quantum uncertainty as just another survival challenge." As the cleanup began and the prison returned to some semblance of normalcy, Mason reflected on the irony of it all. The various species had conspired to create quantum-shifted weapons, seeing them as the ultimate evolution in warfare. But they had forgotten one crucial detail: true evolution doesn't happen in a laboratory. It happens in the wild, in the dangerous places where survival demands adaptation. And Earth, that little blue death trap of a planet, had been preparing its children for this fight since before humans even understood what quantum physics was. The prison break that never was had become something far more significant, a reminder to the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous ability isn't the power to bend reality. Sometimes, it's the power to survive it, one quantum uncertainty at a time. "Ready to go home?" Commander Park asked as the last of the quantum signatures faded from the facility's sensors. Mason looked at Clicka, then at the now quantum-locked facility that had been his home for the past weeks. Actually, Commander, I was thinking. Earth's got plenty of naturally quantum-active zones that could use some monitoring. And I know a Garcidian who's pretty good at reading quantum patterns. Clicka's antennae twitched in what Mason had learned to recognize as excitement. You mean? Welcome to the Quantum Monitoring Division, Mason said. Trust me, compared to this prison, Earth's quantum hot spots are practically a vacation spot. And somewhere in the background, reality itself seemed to hum in agreement, its quantum uncertainties dancing to a rhythm that humans had learned to follow before they even knew what quantum physics was. Sometimes, the best way to win wasn't to change the rules of the game, it was to show everyone that you'd been playing a different game all along.